Para nós, né, para mim em especial, Pixinguinha foi o maior músico brasileiro, não é? O que ele representa para nós foi uma coisa realmente fantástica.
Racial discrimination was now banned in Brazil, but prejudice and the belief in white supremacy was still widespread. So there was outrage in the press that black musicians like Pixinguinha should be allowed to represent Brazil when he and his band, Os Batutos, were invited to give a European tour.
In 1923, when the first great choro group, Os Batutos, which means the cool guys, went to Paris with Pixinguinha with the flute, it really had an enormous effect. People who talk only about American jazz in Paris don't realize that the Brazilians got there first.
In Europe, Pixinguinha heard American jazz, which he began to mix with choro and samba. He later switched from flute to saxophone and learned two important lessons that would be repeated throughout the story of Brazilian music. The first, that Brazilian and Western styles are constantly blending together. And the second, that those who are thought to be too westernized are soon criticized in Brazil.
A música talvez mais famosa dele, que é uma música chamada Carinhoso, essa música, quando apareceu, algumas pessoas criticaram, porque achavam que essa música recebia muita influência de uma música estrangeira. Na época se falava muito do jazz band.
By the time of his death in 1972, Pixinguinha had become one of the legends of Brazilian music, a player who pioneered Brazil's links with jazz and guaranteed the popularity of choro throughout the years when samba would be transformed by fashion and by politics. Samba and choro both started out as the homegrown musical styles of the black workers and migrants who'd moved to Rio. The songs of the early samba singers dealt with the realities of everyday life in the city.
Eu acho que o gênero que mais retrata, né, a questão social, a questão política, né, a luta, o sacrifício de cada um, talvez seja o samba, acredito que seja o samba, pelo fato dos sambistas serem pessoas de uma classe social mais pobre.
In the early days, musicians faced not only prejudice, but harassment. In 1928, the first so-called samba school opened in Rio, a club where musicians and composers could meet, rehearse, and plan their activities for the city's annual pre-Lent carnival, though the authorities banned black and mixed-race carnival groups from parading through downtown, predominantly white Rio.
É melhor morrer crucificado, sermos livres das mulheres de hoje em dia.
Many of the early samba songs romanticized malandros, the sharply dressed hustlers of the black communities, and the authorities outlawed musicians and their samba parties.
Mas a polícia, na época, não gostava muito dessas reuniões, porque o sambista era considerado malandro. E aí a polícia proibia o samba naquela época. Então muita gente disfarçava e dizia que não era samba que estava acontecendo naquela casa, que era macumba, que era terreiro, entendeu? Porque Tia Seata era também mãe de santo. Então eles camuflavam o samba, dizendo que o que estava acontecendo ali era uma reunião religiosa.
But all that would suddenly change. Samba was to be appropriated, transformed and used by the government. From now on, music would play a new role in Brazilian life. The man who transformed samba was President Getúlio Vargas, who seized power with military help in 1930.
Brasil.
Vargas controlled Brazil for 18 years, first as a dictator and later as a democratically elected president. He was both an authoritarian and a populist who started out as an admirer of the European fascists Mussolini and Hitler. He banned strikes but promoted industry and social welfare, and he was determined to bring a new national identity to his vast country, then a loose confederation of states. He did so by championing those intellectuals who argued that Brazil should not be modelled on white Europe, but should positively celebrate racial mixing and Afro-Brazilian culture. The president spread the message using the new medium of nationwide radio stations and by promoting samba, now the government-approved symbol of Brazil's racial democracy.
It was a really big cultural revolution going on in Brazil. A new music, a new way of thinking about Brazilian culture, all these things together, and the whole creation of media to broadcast the new ideas. So Vargas was very lucky to have all these tools.
The Vargas administration wanted to use samba to unify Brazil, but in return it was demanded that samba should change. In 1936, it was announced that samba musicians could now take part in the Carnival Parade. They were even encouraged to do so, but there were new, strict rules. Samba schools were now required to present a national theme with a patriotic lesson.
Escola de samba era uma coisa de marginal, era uma coisa proibida. E ele, como presidente, ditador, ele falou, autorizou a escola de samba, mas tinha que falar da história do Brasil. Quer saber da história do Brasil? Ouça samba enredo.
A mulher é jogo difícil de acertar.
Samba, of course, was mixed-race music, with its roots in both Africa and Europe, and promoting samba suited the Vargas policy of encouraging Brazilian unity by celebrating ethnic integration. And yet, throughout the 1930s, Vargas continued to develop strong links with European fascist states, including Nazi Germany, where such ideas would surely have horrified those who believed in Aryan supremacy.
7:00 em Brasília, horário brasileiro de verão.
In January 1936, there was a special edition of the radio program Hora do Brasil, broadcast directly from Brazil to Nazi Germany. It included government-approved songs written by black musicians.
A very important part of the show was the samba music from the samba schools, and I always think about the Nazi German listening to that kind of very black, very African Brazilian music.
President Vargas made samba respectable, and it was now appropriated by middle-class Brazilians. Old-style sambas about malandros were still popular in the poor black parts of town, but were now officially censored. The middle class favoured a more melodic, sophisticated style, samba canção, and songs that praised the glory and the beauty of Brazil. Samba's broad new appeal was helped by exceptional composers like Ari Barroso, the son of a lawyer, whose Aquarela do Brasil, Watercolour of Brazil, became almost a national anthem. Unlike carnival samba or samba enredo, samba canção could be sung by individuals as well as massed bands. Dorival Caymmi, who was photographed with Vargas, became samba's first celebrated solo singer-songwriter.
He played guitar in a very peculiar way, and he was the first one to be singer, composer, guitarist, like, Bob Dylan.
Louvado seja Deus
só meu pai. Louvado seja Deus, oh meu pai.
He was a very good singer. His voice was beautiful. His music was absolutely fresh and simple and good. And his lyrics were wonderful. He was the round artist, everything. He could do everything very well. His lyric was always about the sea, about Bahia, about the fishermen.
Canoeiro puxa a rede do mar, cerca o peixe, bate o remo, puxa a corda, colhe a rede. O canoeiro puxa a rede do mar, o canoeiro puxa a rede do mar.
The Vargas flirtation with Nazi Germany ended in 1939, when Brazil signed the Good Neighbor Agreement with its big neighbor to the north, the USA. Links between Brazil and America grew stronger, just at the right time for the emergence of samba's first international superstar and Brazil's most successful Hollywood actress, the colourful, highly controversial Carmen Miranda.
O tico-tico tá outra vez aqui, o tico-tico tá comendo meu fubá. Se o tico-tico tenta que se alimentar, que vai comer umas minhocas no fumar. O tico-tico tá outra vez aqui, o tico-tico tá comendo meu fubá. Se o tico-tico tenta que se alimentar, que vai comer umas minhocas no fumar.
Carmen Miranda, she herself was Hollywood. She herself was kitsch. She was internationally known in a way that brought to our minds both pride and shame.
I wonder why does everybody look at me and then begin to talk about the Christmas tree. I hope that means that everyone is glad to see the lady and the tutti-frutti.
I think we should all celebrate Carmen Miranda. First of all, because she was one of the major singers in Brazilian music, and she helped launch some of the greatest composers of the 30s.
Some said she wasn't a true Brazilian because she was born in Portugal, but Carmen Miranda conquered Brazil during the 30s and then moved on to the States. Her songs came from the finest writers of the day, including Dorival Caymmi and Ari Barroso. But she had little in common with the early samba singers.
Her samba singing, which was not the authentic, near to the slums, black kind of samba, was nonetheless very rich.
Outra vez aqui, o tico-tico tá comendo meu fubá. Se o tico-tico tenta que se alimenta, que vai comer umas minhocas no fumar. O tico-tico tenta.
Carmen Miranda sang on Broadway, starred in Hollywood films, and performed at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt. But when she returned to Brazil in July 1940, the reaction was not what she'd expected.
The first time she came back from the United States and she sang in Rio, she was booed. In many ways, she became a caricature. And people were saying she was Americanized and she was not authentic.
Como eu estava dizendo a vocês, show nos hospitais, nos campos é muito bom, mas por intermédio do cinema é muito melhor, porque vocês estão pertinho, podem viver muito melhor, é muito mais interessante.
Miss Miranda?
O que é que você quer?
Well, pardon me, but you're talking to Americans, and I think it'd be better if you'd speak English.
Oh, I forgot. Well, fellows, you know, what I'd like to talk to you about is this.
Then she recorded a song about it, and it's a masterpiece saying, they say that I came back Americanized. But it's so witty and graceful.
E disseram que eu voltei americanizada, com burro do dinheiro que estou muito rica, que não suporto mais o breque de pandeiro e fico arrepiado ouvindo uma cuica.
People see her like a funny comedian with a funny hat, you know, and they don't realize how wonderful she was as a singer and how important she was to the development of a certain style of Brazilian music which we call samba sincopado, the syncopated samba. She was great at that. She was the best.
Carmen Miranda came to symbolize Brazil for the outside world, though she'd been criticized at home for becoming too westernized. Her sophisticated, light-hearted songs had little to do with the everyday struggles of many ordinary Brazilians.